welcome Jeff Outlaw to episode 2 of Producers Producing. Thank you so much for hopping on with me today. So Jeff is the executive producer at Netvrk and
correct.
founder of PFFT Studios.
Yes.
Did I get both of those correct?
You got them both correct. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for hopping on today. I really appreciate it. It's been a while since we've caught up, and I was giving you the rundown. So why don't you tell me a little bit about like where you're at now and who you are, and then dive into like how you got into production.
Yeah. All right. So let's see. So over 20 years of game creation at this point, which is kind of amazing when I think about it, because not a lot of people make it that long in their career. But so I started off, I don't know how much of this you know. I started off as an artist and an animator, and I was doing environments, and I was doing animation for the first 7 years.
Oh, that's awesome.
I worked my way up to animation manager at the first studio I was working at.
Okay.
And then at that point I was managing schedules and team members and everything. And then I got a job offer to go to Australia as a producer. That was my first production role. And it was not really very different from what I was doing. I think the studio I was at didn't really have producers. This is way back in the day when producers weren't really, they weren't in every studio anyways.
Yeah. Yep.
But the rule is if you get a job offer to go to Australia, you've got to take it. Like that's just the rule. So
right. I mean, that's like such a rare opportunity for sure, especially back then. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was in Australia from 2007, 2009. That was a great time. I mean, I loved it. It's a beautiful country to visit. I don't know if they can I wouldn't make my home there for too much longer than 2 years, but 2 years were great.
Yeah.
And that's when I actually learned like better what a producer is supposed to be. I picked up Agile. I was coached in Agile and Scrum by a guy who was really smart and knew exactly how to teach it. And then I took that to Pittsburgh, and I worked in a studio in Pittsburgh for about 7 years. Mm-hmm. And then went to VR stuff for a little while, and then the studio in Orlando. So I bounced around quite a bit. I now find myself working a lot of the studio I'm at now is a blockchain and Web3 gaming studio.
Okay.
And I very much like it. I mean, I've been a blockchain advocate since I guess 2017 is when I started understanding it, but more because I was studying finance and what money really was back like 2007, 2008, I started like diving into what makes money. And then 2017, I understand blockchain and got into those stuff. So when blockchain and gaming came together, I was like, this is perfect. I love both those fields. I kind of mixed them both together. And that's where I ended up where I am now.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. So I'm curious. So you, because when we met, we were both working at Iron Galaxy, and you were definitely a big advocate for the educational side of gaming and Scrum and Agile, and a lot of those parts were kind of coalescing at that time. So, you said you had a really good mentor. When you first got into production at the studio, what was the studio's name in Australia?
The one I was producer first, that was Pandemic Studios.
Okay, Pandemic. So when you went to Pandemic, did you have a notion? You said you were like their first producer, or that's when you segued. Did you have a notion of Agile? Because that was even before it became the kind of preferred method of development, or even for software before it transitioned into gaming. So like, what was your knowledge of that even before you got there?
It wasn't that I wasn't their studio's first producer. They had a whole bunch of producers, but they had,
that was your first.
Yeah. It was my first role as a producer, right? And the studio before that, the one I left as an animation manager, they didn't have producers necessarily.
Okay.
So yeah, that studio, Pandemic had like two teams. They had a very large team working on an Xbox 360 title, and then they had a really small team working on a Wii title, and that was upstairs. We were kind of separated. Oh, okay. And the big Xbox 360 title, we were doing standard, task tracking with Gantt charts and moving things around. And it was there were 3 producers on that project. I was producer for animation and design, but there was also an art producer and an engineering producer, and the 3 of us kind of worked together. And we also had a production manager with us as well. But there was and then we had an executive producer who was paired with the creative director. So there was like 5 producers to handle that project of over 100 people. But it was a standard process, and it was everything that I'd always ever done to produce a game. But, that whole Gantt chart style or assembly line style, it had all kinds of problems. So eventually that project was shut down. The studio decided we couldn't ship that title, and they downsized. and they put me with the team that was upstairs doing the Wii title.
Okay.
And those guys, they had there's one room they call it the war room with all these pieces of paper taped to the wall and all these numbers and all these boxes and everything. And I didn't know what was going on. And they asked me to. They had an assistant producer, but their producer had left, and they were producerless. And they asked me to jump from just a producer role to their senior producer, to jump over this guy who was still there. And I was like, wait a minute, he's got this great system, or he has a system. And I should say, at Pandemic, there were 3 teams in LA and our 2 teams in Australia. And of all the teams, they always did like happiness surveys. The one team that always did the best was that little Wii team upstairs. They had like much higher, job satisfaction.
Job satisfaction, yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, listen, if I'm going to all of a sudden be this guy's boss, I don't want to screw things up because they seem to be doing very well. Teach me what it is that you're doing so I don't mess it up. And his name was Gary, and he was amazing. He was like really kind of a Australian bloke, kind of a quiet guy, but he was very, very, very smart about this system anyways. And he walked me through it. And every time he would explain something to me, I would go, oh my gosh, that solves this problem that we always have. Or that solves, that gets people like if you know Agile really well, you know that part of it is, or Scrum anyways, part of it is ceremony and cadence and keeping us, but then part of it's also psychological. Like the idea that the producer is not the manager, he's the guy, he's just a team member who helps them keep everything in order. But when I'm reporting, engineers reporting what he did yesterday, he's not reporting to the producer. He's reporting it to his teammates.
To the team, yeah.
And that whole psychological, like we're supporting each other and we're responsible to each other. Super, super valuable. Things like the demo day, where everyone has to present something, right? Kind of hold you accountable for your 2-week or your 3-week sprint. Make sure that you've delivered something. There's always that little bit of pressure to show off. And then the retrospective, opening the door to saying, listen, we don't have it perfect. There are ways we can make this better for everybody. Let's talk about it. Not just once at the end of the project when everyone suffered through 2 years of crap, which is what postmortems always were.
Postmortems, yeah, right.
But no, instead, on a regular basis, let's ask ourselves, how do we get better? And it's not an accusatory thing. It's not a finger pointing thing. It's a very much, how do we improve the system so that we only have to suffer through it for 1 3-week period and then we get better. I've worked at studios before where management is super self-conscious about, don't say anything bad about management. So you couldn't have a retrospective. I was told clearly at one studio, no more, after our first retrospective at that studio, no more retrospectives. I said, why? Well, because everyone's accusing the management of making mistakes. I'm like, I don't think that's what they were saying. They were just asking for ways to get better. And they were like, no, adamant. And I didn't last at that studio very long.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Anyways, that's kind of my whole rundown. I don't know if I ranted a bit.
No, that's what this is for. I mean, this is like, there's no set rhyme or reason. Just kind of get an understanding of like your background, how you got into production. So, what going from art where you were, and again, if I get it incorrect, so just correct me. But going from art where you were, an artist at heart, you're creating content, then you're starting to manage, and then you make the full shift to not being a content contributor anymore. You're just managing. Do you remember any kind of moments where like, this was a mistake, maybe I don't want to be a producer, or something where you're like, okay, this totally makes sense with the things that I've always loved, which are X, and now I can marry it with Y, and you can kind of keep going.
Really, I mean, like I've kind of at this point, I spent a lot of time also doing design documents and mostly for like economy systems, because I've so many games that require really good economy systems. So I get involved in that. I get to every once in a while, but there was a period there where I left the art behind, but I was never the best animator. There were always way better animators on my team. That's why I was a manager. Yeah. You don't make the best guy stop doing the stuff that they're the best at, right? Yeah, don't do that. They're way better animators than I was. So that never bothered me. And I got to see all their cool work, right? And the concept artists and all the thing too. So it didn't really bother me. And I did art on the side. I did some gallery shows and things that. So I did watercolors. I got plenty of my artistic my artistic side got out of me, other ways.
Yeah.
But the part about the production that I've always still enjoyed is the idea of watching other people do their best work, right? And finding ways to help them do their best work. So if I can solve a problem or take something off of somebody's plate, like, I don't know what the client really wants. Well, let me go find out for you, and I'll try to translate what they say to something that you can make actionable. Like,
Right.
if
Right.
that's my role, that's totally cool. I also got very lucky
Love that.
about, oh gosh, maybe 10 years into being a producer.
Hmm.
So I learned Agile and I was running teams. This is in Pittsburgh. I decided I was going to write a book about how to be a better producer.
Yeah.
And as
Yeah.
I'm doing the research for that, I'm realizing I'm a kind of a crappy producer. Like I really was
It's
when
the
I look
weirdest
back.
light bulb moment ever, right?
Not that I was not good at the ceremonies and all those things, but the
Yeah.
people, I was really dismissive of people, I think, or just not attuned to, like, I think as a producer, one very important aspect is being able to understand and relate to people.
Yeah.
And I came in
100%.
and I credit retrospectives and the teams I was working with because they held me to account. It was great. I mean, I learned quite a bit from them too. But I came in pretty brash and pretty egotistical. I'm like, I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing. And I'm pretty laid back and like, I like to laugh and, I'm a jokey kind of guy at times. But I remember very clearly the whole trigger for it was that somebody's had put in the retrospective that I didn't appear to be taking their concerns seriously because I was always laughing. Because I always kind of, at that point, was always like, we're going to figure this out. Don't worry. It'll be okay.
Yeah.
But the way that I was saying that to some people was super dismissive. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be that way
Right.
anymore. So I want to learn how to
Right.
be a better producer. So while we went out and studied, as we get around to talking about really good tool sets, um, there's a YouTube channel called Charisma on Command that I find
Okay.
very useful.
Awesome.
And the books, Thanks for the Feedback and Difficult Conversations. Those are the same authors on those two books.
Okay.
Those two books too, super like foundational to me being better at taking in feedback, even from people who aren't really particularly good at giving feedback, like even people who are yelling at me. I'm like,
Right. Right.
now I think I'm better anyways, to the point of saying, okay, well, they're not saying it very well, but
Take
they
a
are saying
breath.
something that's important to them,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to make sure that I hear what they're saying and can react to it and learn from it. I mean, at some point you can say, all right, they have the wrong, they don't have all the information and they're wrong, but I still don't want to say to their face, that there's probably some truth into what they're saying, or at least for them, it's a truth for them. So I should still react to that in a way
I
that's
was going
going
to
to be
say it
helpful.
takes a beat to try and figure out, well, what can I take away from this that they're saying that is
Right.
actually maybe not exactly the way they're saying it. It's like, how can I dissect that so I can actually have a good conversation about it? For sure. I mean, that I totally know what
And
you
what
mean.
that ended up turning into was, for the last couple of jobs, my role became, okay, the client is very upset. I worked at a lot of studios that were for hire studios.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the client is really upset. Someone's got to calm them down. Jeff, get in there and calm them down. So my role became, they put me on projects where the client was, particularly not happy. And I guess I had learned all these
Partner
tools.
whisperer. Yeah.
Yeah, sort of a little bit,
Yeah.
like, and I don't mind it. Again, I like the idea of getting people who are, um, carried away or maybe at an emotional high, meeting them where they are and then bringing them back down to a place where we can still be constructive with each other. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's important. And especially if you're working at a work for hire studio or, the majority of the time, at least I've found in my own personal career, is even when you're not at a work for hire studio, the chances are that same skill set is going to apply to an internal stakeholder or the C-suite or somebody ancillary that still is very important within that, reporting process or that process of how you're communicating with other people. So it's like that same skill applies.
yeah,
And it's kind of funny. One thing you just mentioned that like totally resonated. You were talking about how you sometimes make jokes in situations that were serious, and then people were like, "You're not taking it seriously." I have definitely heard that feedback. I think that is, even for myself, I have maybe a nervous tendency of like when things are getting very, very serious and I'm not 100% sure of like the exact answer, I might make a joke to just try and lighten things, or I might just make a joke, even if it's, I don't know, being asked of something to just try and lighten the mood. And people are like,
right.
I don't think you're taking this seriously. I've heard that feedback later. I'm like, I'm taking this incredibly seriously. It's just getting a little bit too serious. And that's like my coping mechanism. So I will try to figure
Right.
out and maybe not make a joke. And it's never like a, you know, a lewd joke or anything, but it's just a joke,
No, no.
right?
Right,
And
right,
that's
right.
enough to be like, you're not taking it seriously. So
Yeah, yeah.
that's funny. Um, so now, so moving from, so I saw your shell games for a long time. We worked together at IG for a while. And then now at Netvrk, you were talking about dealing with, so is that a good part of your role now? Like dealing with, explain a little bit actually about what Netvrk does and what you do for them. And then I'm curious how that, you were just talking about how like that work for hire kind of partner whisperer role comes into play. Do you do that, a lot of that at Netvrk, and maybe telling a little about what you guys do?
Yeah, sure. Netvrk is it's a metaverse project. It was founded by a couple of guys who started in VR.
Okay.
They rode the wave of the NFT wave and the NFT land sale wave, and they built up the concept of this big open world where you own your assets and you'll be able to create. Their part of the work is creating a what they call the creation engine, but it's a tool suite that people can use to generate their own content and then sell that content for crypto, which is can be translated into real world currency. So
Okay.
as everyone was getting NFTs crazy, so we've signed a whole bunch of partners to be partner projects to Netvrk as a world. So we were going to create the world and allow them to bring their characters, their avatars into our
Right.
world. So part of my role was I facilitate the conversations between partner projects, and as we have advancements to our project, I talk to them and let them know what the advancements are. If there's technical, I don't do the technical stuff, but I can
Right.
facilitate conversations between their tech team and our tech team. But generally, so that's a part of the role is
Cool.
handling the
Yeah.
partners. Yeah. And I can't. And some of the partners we've had, like working with Coolio's estate, we were actually working with Coolio before he passed away, but now
Oh,
Coolio's
no kidding.
estate, yeah,
Yeah.
and the guy who runs his estate, a friend of Coolio's, super nice guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah.
That's
So,
pretty wild.
so with them, great, it's been super smooth. But we've had other celebrities we work with that are just. I mean, I don't have much need for celebrities myself.
Sure.
And I don't. I live. I don't know if you know this. I live here in South Carolina, like among the cow fields and everything.
Oh, do you
So I'm
really? Oh, that's awesome.
100% remote.
Okay.
And I mean, me from Hollywood, like I could care less.
Yeah.
So people
Yeah.
with like really large egos who come in and this one guy tried to bulldoze us. He's trying to get a whole bunch of money from the studio for very little of his ego
Its
work.
own
And I
time
was,
and commitment. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I kind of had this simmer. It was an uncomfortable conversation to say the least. That
Uh,
so I don't win everybody over. I've
yeah.
gotten good at bringing some people down, but I've had a couple of conversations in this job and other jobs where I remember that conversation didn't go well, and I'll probably never. There was no way I was ever going to satisfy that person.
Yeah. Yeah. The partner hat that you wear as a producer, it's almost that weird kind of beady hybrid role too, because you want to get more potential projects with that partner or not. And then sometimes that does come down to like the not, right? Like, well, I don't think we actually should probably work together anymore with this particular partner afterwards. Let's
Right.
fulfill this commitment, or let's not even get into this commitment before we, have to get any further. And that's,
Well,
and that's part of it.
I'm all about being equitable, right? If I'm
Yeah.
treating one partner one way, I'm trying to treat every partner that way. At
Yeah.
the same time, if this partner is putting in a lot of effort, they should be getting more from us than this one who's not putting in a whole bunch of effort and still expecting all that guy expected. Because you kind of draw the line. Well, yeah, he's getting all that attention because he was also doing all these things for us. You aren't doing any of those things for us, so you'll get less attention.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
but
So,
honestly, that's just the partner stuff. I much prefer the internal stuff. I mean, I much prefer I just like the idea as a producer. I get to know everybody on the team. There are engineers who don't know any artists on the team, and there are animators who won't know any QA people on the team. But as a producer, right, you get to know everybody,
yeah.
and that's another reason why I've always liked this role is because I get to know the entire team.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you get to look at every side of development
Yeah.
for what everybody's facing and get to know everybody. Yeah, I love it too. I totally agree. Are you finding? Do you find anything different in terms of? I know every new job has new challenges, new opportunities to learn and grow. What have been some of the moments in this particular role, especially maybe as it relates to kind of Web3 and blockchain? I know you've been like researching it and interested in it and focusing on that. But is there anything where you're like, oh, that's actually really different than what I've done in the
Oh,
past?
so when I got put onto the Netvrk team, I actually came into the Netvrk team as I was just come in as the economy designer. That's all I was going to do. I was going to do any kind of production.
Okay.
And they had a C-level person just lose his mind and leave the studio in a very disruptive way.
Oh
And
no.
I was kind of saying to some people when I heard about it, I was like, that we shouldn't overreact, publicly, because there's no
Yeah.
reason for it. He was just being a jerk, so let him be a jerk, and we're just going to go on and do great things. Anyways, that conversation led to me being in the room as we started fashioning our public-facing response. That parlayed into me doing more public-facing stuff and coming. Anyways, that's how I ended up being the executive producer. So I took this new role. I took the roles, and then I started taking a look at the whole project as a whole. And
Okay.
I drew up a story map of what the project really should look like, because they didn't really have a good story map, which is another tool I would talk about as like a really vital piece of
Yeah.
being a producer. So as I drew up the story map, I had vertical columns that you never saw in traditional gaming, like the economy and the white paper and the community outreach. Because in traditional gaming, right, you announce with a press release that you're going to make this game, you go quiet for 3 years, and then you pop your head up just as the game's ready to go into alpha and tell everybody what you've done. But with these kinds of Web3 games, because the community is they're partially investors because they went and bought some of the items that helped to fund the creation of the game, or they bought land or they bought NFTs.
Okay.
We're in constant communication with the community, or we ought to be anyways.
Right, because they
So
literally have they have money, they have skin in the game, right? So they
right,
want to know.
exactly.
It's
Right.
it's like it's just like if you bought a stock, right? You have to let your
Yes.
group
Yeah.
know what's going on.
So one of the key members of our team is our community management team, and our community manager and lead in particular. He's guy's tremendous,
Yeah.
and we wouldn't be anywhere without somebody like that, and that's someone very good in that role, doing the hard work that he does to keep the community kind of always engaged and happy, and or at least kind of smoothing over the difficulties.
Right.
So that's a brand new vertical that you didn't see in traditional gaming. The economy and so beyond just having another couple of verticals, those also interact with a whole bunch of different areas within the rest of the team, right? So community manager, for example, has to be in sync with the designers, because as the designers are talking about what else they're going to put in the game, the community wants to know about it, or ideas come in from the community. He's got to talk to the designer, lead designer or the creative director. So there's a lot more back and forth. You know how it is if you've got 4 groups, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you got 16 different paths of communication. If you have a 5th group, now all of a sudden it's exponential, right? Now you've not just 16, you've got, what is that? 16 times 4, whatever, then
Like a beautiful
48.
mind all of a sudden, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So now we're talking about like 7 different verticals, because you've got all these other areas in there. It's a lot more communication management. And I've always said that the key role for a producer really is a communication lead. You facilitate communication among team members, from your team to the entire studio, from your team to your partner, to your stakeholders on the outside, whoever hired the studio, and then with the team and the future or the past. But basically, being able to record everything that's important to get recorded, whether it's your tasks or your meeting notes, that kind of thing. We have to facilitate a lot of communication across time.
Yeah.
It's a key role in those ways.
Yeah.
I mean,
No,
I don't mean to talk it up. I mean, you still can't make a game without an engineer either. So
there's gonna be artists and designers and engineers, right? You can understand the commonalities in how a game would come together, but then there's all those things for a producer you didn't know until you first came into it, or you learn on a new game, right? So we were talking about that vertical of community. It's almost like it almost sounds like a game in live ops, but it's not quite a game in live ops, right? Because a game in live ops, you now have to separate into managing that community and hearing what they have to say and what they're interested in, while you're also balancing what you want to do for the game and what your own team wants to do for the game. It sounds very similar to that, except for your product is still in the works. And forgive me if your product is already out in the market and people are using it, but for some of these, you've already launched your token sale, so people have already invested, but you're still behind the scenes getting that game to come out, or getting that product to come out.
Yeah, it's actually a good way to put it. It is very much like live ops, right?
Yeah, that's pretty wild. Was there anything? So besides that's definitely different. Is there anything else? And I've heard that before, where one of the interesting challenges is that kind of community aspect, or just some of the nature of those groups that are more into the Web3 and crypto space. Has there been anything else that kind of popped up to your mind that's been very different than you're like, oh, okay, that I've never had to tackle that before.
Well, the other aspect of it is, all right, when we talk about reward system in a
Mhm.
video game that you just, in any other traditional game, right? You can reward somebody with a level up, right? I've gone from level 3 to level 4. Oh, it took me
Yeah.
3 days, but now I'm on level 4. And that can feel like a real, that's a huge, wow, look at that. 4 days and I'm level 4. Woof.
Yeah. Yeah.
With the reward system inside of a Web3 game, when it's tied to real world value that's very easy to recognize,
Mhm.
right? I worked for 4 days and I earned so many dollars, right? But so many dollars, like if we ended up rewarding somebody for 4 days worth of work with a single dollar worth of, tokens, they're
Right.
like, that was not worth it. It's very easy to translate your reward into real world
Into currency.
value.
Yeah.
So you can really upset the player. Oh,
Yeah.
they worked 4 days to level up to this level. That's the amorphous, right? They can't tell how much value that's supposed to be, how long it should take. But if I
Right.
tell you worked for 4 days to earn a dollar, to be mad, right? You know that
Right.
that's not
Right.
worth it.
Yeah.
So that's an aspect of it, because there's real world value in the reward system. You got to be really thoughtful about a new level of thoughtfulness to your reward system, and really to any part of it. Like we have one part of the economy system that we designed is in-game currency. We just call it energy, but it's the amount. It's based on the amount of hours you play and the amount of effort you put into your play. So if you
Okay.
sit in your space for just an hour, you earn like a little bit. But if you sit in your space for an hour and you invite a whole bunch of people in and you do a lot of things in the world and you make the world better, or add to it, then you should get way more than that little drip you got from just standing still.
Yeah.
So again, and it goes back to my understanding of the concept of money, which is it's the way that you measure the amount of time, effort, and creativity someone has put into something. You
Mhm.
talk about gold that has value because it takes time and energy, and if you make a pretty coin out of it, some creativity to get it out of the ground, to refine it down. It's a lot of time and energy goes into
Yeah.
making a gold coin. That's why it has value. Plus, it's limited resource.
Yeah.
Um, really, gold is a limited resource and time is a limited resource. So those two parts make it. Anyways, same
Extra
type of thing when
valuable.
you talk about. Right, right. So same type
Yeah.
of thing when you talk about game economies, and especially crypto game economies. You want to kind of recognize that time and energy and creativity have value, and how you reward the value is a whole other part of the equation.
Yeah, that's got to be a tricky balance. I'm not a strong suit of mine. It's not something I fully grasp, but yeah, that's got to be a tricky balance, especially it's such a different market, such a different kind of niche.
Yeah,
So I've got to imagine there's
and still
still
blossoming.
new. Yeah, I was gonna
Yeah,
say still so much to explore and learn because it's still
yeah,
growing.
yeah. And we have to compete with the traditional gaming sector, which is so massive,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
That's the other thing too. When I was talking to partners and everything, my whole point was we should not be competing with each other. Really, what we're competing with is traditional gaming, legacy gaming, to make sure that people kind of find their way from that system to our system, which ultimately I think is going to win, but
right,
it's going to take
right.
some time.
Yeah, it's got to feel somewhat similar for to make that easy transition instead of feeling like total night and day and a
Yeah,
whole
yeah,
other kind of thing that that a player would have to learn. So
right,
not just on the terms of mechanics, but like the economy and all that other stuff. Next thing you know, they're like, well, I'll just log back out and play something else. So,
right, right, right. And some
uh,
don't want that kind of complexity. They don't want to have to worry about money while they're playing the game. So I get
yeah.
that too.
Do you have any tips and tricks for up and coming producers, or anything that you think is any drops of Jeff wisdom for somebody who wants to break into the production industry, or maybe somebody who's been in production for a while, and you're like, hey, here's some parts
Sure.
that you should kind of
Yeah.
take away.
I did a fair amount of mining of GDC talks and TED talks on how to
Hmm.
talk to people, and how to make games and everything. So the one thing I would do is I'd say mine those resources, right? What I would do when I
Yeah.
would watch a video was I'd watch it once and then watch it a second time with a Google Doc open, where I would try to build the outline that the speaker used to make their talk, and I would
Hmm.
capture it all. And I have a document. It's in my personal G drive. That's, gosh, probably over 200 pages long, of all these different talks that I've watched, the link that you can find them at, and the basic
Right.
outline of the talk I gave. So whenever I want to refer back to, oh, someone was talking about this, I can go back and look at information that I captured.
Oh, that's cool.
That's
Yeah.
That's the first thing. The other tip that I always give producers is, like I mentioned, Difficult Conversations and Thanks for the
Yep.
Feedback. Those two books by Sheila Heen and oh gosh, I'm blanking on the guy's name. Anyways, when someone offers, oh, you should totally read this book. What I've
Hmm.
done, I've gotten to now is
Hmm.
I find the author of the book, and then I go and look and see if they've done a video like explaining the book. Because then you can
Oh,
get through the
yeah.
book, you can get a lot of the information about the book just from watching the video of them, and then I follow that first process where I do the outline and everything.
Yeah, yeah. Do the outline in the notes.
So that's another
That's awesome.
shortcut to getting the information.
Yeah,
Um,
that's. I remember when we were working together. You would go and you'd have the production team watch videos, or you'd talk about different videos or speeches or TED talks that were cool.
yeah,
And I remember back then you were one piece of advice was like watch it at like 1.25 or even 1.5x speed, to get through the
yeah.
information. And it was so funny because you think about that now and you're like, of course, but back then it was like, wait, what? And I mean, that's still how I like listen to a lot of podcasts. Maybe not 1.5 because it depends on who is talking and what they're talking about. But yeah,
Now you
I
realize
remember.
everyone's gonna go click on this video and make it go one
Right,
and a quarter
right.
speed.
And I'm gonna sound like a chipmunk, and it's gonna be. I mean,
Uh, yeah, those two tips that come right to mind. And the last thing I would say is like really, if you've got the mindset to become a people person and you're halfway as organized, you can become a producer. I had one guy that I trained out of I was working at a military contracting company for a year, and this one
okay,
guy who wanted to be a producer, and he'd never been. He was just a Navy guy, and
right.
I recognized he was smart and he was organized. And I said, I'll show you how to do it. And now the guy works. I think he works at Universal now. He's super happy working as
Oh,
making
that's
video
awesome.
games. It's his
Yeah,
lifelong dream. So
yeah.
totally can happen.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, what are some tools, some kind of tools in your own toolbox that are things you swear by?
Um,
These can be like your own kind of personal productivity tools, or they could be like game dev specific, or just anything like even as basic as like I love to put all my notes into OneNote and I tag them
uh,
like X or Y.
yeah. Well, I use
Stuff that you
Photoshop
kind of
still.
swear by.
Yeah, I use Photoshop a whole bunch still because
Okay,
I like to use visuals to explain what I'm talking about, right? So I'll
visual learning. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and visual just broadcast really.
Hmm.
Um, I use Google presentations, right? So I do a
Hmm.
lot of story mapping, and I use presentations to do the story mapping because it's just a quick way to draw a whole bunch of boxes and put text in it and draw a story map. So I
Okay.
very much like those. The combination of those two things, between doing up images and visual flowcharts, those kinds of things, I think those end up being a really good way to communicate to people.
Yeah.
Um, and then I really do like taking running notes in a meeting. If I'm in a long standing meeting, which I remember I just had one a couple of days ago, I'll have the note sheets that I'm using that I'm taking notes in. I'll have that up on screen so everybody who's in the meeting can see me taking the notes, and
Hmm.
that way they can quickly correct me if I've typed something wrong. Or this is a trick that I've used before, where if someone feels like someone's stuck on something that they're really adamant about and they're stuck on it and they won't let it go, oftentimes if you write it down on a document and show them that you've written it down, that's enough for them to go, okay, it's recorded, finally I can move on to the next subject. So I use note taking in front of a
Yeah.
crowd to kind of keep them to keep it also helps to keep the meeting moving, right? Because especially if I put the agenda there first and say, okay, we're going to this section now, does anybody see anything in the section before that I missed that I should be adding in? Or
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
yeah.
I really
So
like that. That's one thing that I have fallen. I have done it mixed waves where I have been really good about doing notes live in front of when I'm in a meeting, even running it or just participating and I've also like kind of fallen into that trap where like set up meetings with no agenda or maybe not being as accurate with like the recaps and just trying to make. But I do like that as like a good kind of forcing function for those meetings to
right,
like be taking those notes, be capturing the action items, and then also because like what you're saying, it'll keep things moving along, but it'll remind people of like, oh yeah, I do have to follow up on that, or oh no, Jeff, you wrote that down wrong. That's not what we're talking about.
right. There's a
Let's
not in that
talk
sentence
about
that you
that.
didn't include. That not is very important.
Exactly,
Yeah, it's not
exactly,
do this. It's do not do that. Oh, right, right. Let me put the not in there. It's
exactly.
and
Yeah.
then the other part about that is, especially if you're in with clients and things, what we would do, we learned the hard way. What we came to do in Pittsburgh at Show Games was we would make sure that we send a copy of those notes to the people. Well, first of all, at the very top, you should include who's attended the meeting so that people can't say, well, I wasn't at that meeting. And you can say, no, I've got your name. You were definitely there. But then we would send it to the client also and say, listen, here's the notes that I captured. Please send over any you have. Or if there's anything in here that we captured in error, let us know.
Yep.
Because then 4 months down the road, when they say, we never said that. And I go, well, we did say it. We said it in this meeting, dated here. You were at the meeting and you said it, this part right here. You didn't correct it. So I assumed that it was still correct. Sure, we can make the change that you're asking for, but recognize that now this is going to be a change order because you had already said do it this way.
Yeah, I was going to say what that last part was super key because it's I've had that, and I don't necessarily want to say the partner or the project, but I have definitely had that in the past where for like milestone reviews where we would load up a doc, we'd have a running doc of what was said, what was tracked, when it was logged, when it was fixed, and it can be as elaborate as needed, but the purpose is to serve exactly what you said. So we'd say, hey, you said to change X, we did change it, we put it in that build, you said it's approved, now you're saying it's not approved. Totally fine, we get it, we can make that change, but here's what that change means now. Like, we want you to understand that like it was signed off on, and we did hear you, we listened to you,
right?
We can make that change, but that change doesn't come for free, right? And it's not, it's not a finger wagging exercise, right? It's never like, oh, I caught you on that one. But it is to keep a record because so much stuff is said and so much goes on throughout the course of development that, you could get yourself into quite a conundrum. And that was definitely, I think it's probably different in gaming than it is in maybe like consulting or tried and true software development, because you use the word change order where like it is very often the case where like, okay, we can do that change, but contractually now it means this much more time and this much more money. Please sign here. Whereas in game development, you often end up just kind of like eating it, which then becomes another kind of problem for another episode later about, scope change and cost change and all that stuff that really gets you. So. Oh, I was going to say I wanted you to shout out. You have a podcast, or you have a.
No, I have an animated series. That's right. PFFT Studios. Yeah. So if you go and search Hazzard Hollow Locals on YouTube, or if you just go to the PFFT website, we have the link there too. Awesome. But I have an animated show called Hazzard Hollow Locals. It's about a cartoon gorilla and a cartoon raccoon who have their own podcast that they're trying to make internet famous. Because they work lawn care and they're tired of working lawn care.
Awesome.
So it's very Southern humor based. It's basically he meets every nut who lives in his town and he kind of has them on the podcast as like a local celebrity.
That is so cute.
It's kind of fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. I will definitely link that. Yeah, and I will definitely link that and I'll check it out. I'm excited. It's awesome. Thank you so much, Jeff. I appreciate all your time. It was great catching up. It's been a while.
Yeah, right.
And I appreciate all your time. And I would love to do more. The whole goal, like I was saying earlier, before we hit the press record button, is just get some insights and wisdom, kind of where we're at today. But the whole goal is like to evolve this into a little bit more specific on like, how do you mentor or how do you have those tough conversations and talk with different great producers about their experience in maybe, kind of go a layer deeper than just how do you get into gaming and why do you do what you do, but to talk about specific things. I think that helps a lot too. And so,
it'd be great to talk about like the people management and the things a little bit deeper because there's quite a bit there.
Yeah. Oh, there's tons there. So first is to
managing your boss. That's a whole other.
Yes.
That's a whole other deal too.
That's a whole other deal too. Yeah. Thank you so much for catching up, Jeff. I'll put a link to your awesome animated series and let's do another one in the future.
Sounds great.
All right. Thanks, Jeff.